So hello, welcome. This is a talk about my career at NASA, and welcome to ask questions. I'll talk a little bit about my career to give you an overview. I started at the Kennedy Space Center in 1985, fresh out of college. I was a graduate with computer engineering degree from Florida Institute of Technology, and I worked for Lockheed Space Operations Company, which was the shuttle prime contractor at the time. Can you all hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay, that's good. And so I worked on the space shuttle main engines, which are the three liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen fueled engines in the back of the space shuttle. I did that for about 15 years, 5 years with Lockheed, and then NASA actually hired me as a civil servant. So I spent 10 years with NASA working on the space shuttle main engines. And I also worked on some other parts of the space shuttle. I worked on the onboard orbiter avionics system for a while. I also worked on the robot arm that Canada built in the payload bay that retrieves satellites. So we tested the robot arm, did a number of other things. Then I went off to work ground systems, and in 2000 we were building a new launch control system, the computers that launched the space shuttle. I worked on that. That project ended up getting canceled. I worked on a few other projects that got canceled. Finally found my career working the Constellation program, which morphed into SLS and Orion that we launched actually 2022. And I had left NASA by then. I retired in 2019. Hi, hello everyone. And so I had retired in 2019 before we launched SLS and Orion, and I wanted to go out and see it. We actually were on a transatlantic cruise coming back from Europe when they finally did launch SLS and Orion, and we got up super early. What's Constellation program? That was a program after the space shuttle program that was going to launch. It had two different rockets. It had a single solid rocket motor with a crew module on top called an Ares 1 rocket, and it had a heavy lift vehicle they called Ares 5. And the Constellation program got canceled somewhere about 2014, I think. Anyway, it morphed into what they call SLS and Orion. So the heavy lift vehicle that was in Constellation, Ares 5, morphed into this Space Launch System, SLS. And Orion stayed Orion. That was the crew module that was going to go to deep space. Did I ever go into orbit? No, I was a ground person. I worked I was on the launch control team. I've launched many of the space shuttles from the main engine console, but I've never been in space myself. Ares was a cool rocket name. And it's actually, when we launched SLS and Orion, they actually called it Artemis program. And Artemis was the sister of Apollo. And of course, Apollo was the program that we went to the moon with back in the 60s. So they named the SLS Orion program the Artemis program. We all kind of joked that Artemis actually was a hunter that killed Orion, which I'm not sure. I'm not sure NASA thought through that when they named Artemis, but it's a good name. And I've stood under the solid rocket boosters. They're impressive. They are impressive. And each solid rocket motor is bolted to the mobile launch platform with only 4 bolts. There's 4 bolts on a solid rocket motor on the left and 4 bolts on the solid rocket on the right. And those are the only things holding the entire stack to the mobile launcher. What are your thoughts on whole space travel stuff going on these days? I'm excited that space travel is so prevalent. SpaceX is launching an awful lot of things. Starship looks exciting. New Glenn, Blue Origin's rocket, the Pathfinder's out on the launch pad now. My granddaughter actually works for Relativity Space. They've got a methane oxygen launching from pad 16. What did you study at college? So I studied computer engineering, and I graduated and started working at the Space Center right after that. Yeah, I'm excited that they're landing. Private company's going to land on the moon real soon here. I didn't know if it was right before the live or right after, but I've been doing other stuff, so I haven't been on. NASA is a fairly inclusive, I think it's a fairly inclusive place. I mean, it started out as old white guys, but in about the 2010 time period, we had a NASA administrator named Dan Golden, who really came in to try and boost diversity at the Space Center. I was a manager out there for many years, not a supervisory manager, but I was a functional project manager for the ground launch control system. I was the system engineering, integration, and operations manager. And I picked people that were the best for the job. And I had a lot of women that were working as system engineering lead, verification lead, operations managers, because they were the best people for the job. And that's who I picked. There's a lot of comments rolling by, and if I don't see them and get to them, I will try and get to them. Have I always been interested in space? Yes. I was, as a young child, my uncle actually worked for RCA, and RCA built the camera that went on the lunar rover on the moon. Because if you remember, there was a lunar rover and there was a golden, sorry, I use my hands when I get excited, camera that was on the lunar rover. And he worked on that, and he would hand carry it down to Florida. And so he used to give me a lot of NASA stickers and things, and I was always interested in space. And family's on board. Love you too, Brianna. I didn't see if there's others, but I saw Brianna's come through. Brianna's one that works at Relativity Space. Can you talk about the flight computer you built? I didn't build it, but I worked on it. So the main engines, the liquid-fueled engines on the space shuttle, have a computer on it, and to control the engine. And so my kind of claim to fame, if it was fame out there, is I understood the software inside the computer and was able to troubleshoot and look at memory dumps and analyze problems. And I really enjoyed, that was the fun part of my career, troubleshooting problems and understanding how things worked. Probably my personal satisfaction was we were powering up the engine computers about a week before launch. I forget which mission it was. It was back in 92, I think. And we had a computer halt. And everyone was getting ready to go. And there was 3 locations in memory that had been altered when we did a memory dump. And everyone was getting ready to go in and replace the computer and put a new one in. Because it was, they said, well, why 3 locations changed? That's, something, there's a hardware problem somewhere. And so they were working to go replace it, and it was going to delay launch a week. And I went in and looked at the memory dumps and was able to show them that a single event upset changed 1 bit in one memory location, and the other locations were an effect of that. Basically, when the computer halted, it saved all the registers. It's a little technical type stuff, but it saved all the registers on the stack and everything. And so the other 2 locations were caused by the first one. And I was able to prove to them that it was all based on 1 single bit upset, which can happen on the ground. And because of that analysis, they cleared the computer for flight, and we actually launched that day. And a few weeks later, I was at a program review, and the program manager for the engines came up to me and shook my hand. He's like, thank you for that analysis. You saved that launch. And I'm like, I didn't get an award. It's none of those things, but it's just those private moments when you're like, hey, I made a difference at some point. And those are the things that really make it all worthwhile. So hello all. I'm liking that we've all got everyone here. So the changes over the years is incredible. The space shuttle main engines, I'll just stay on that because that was where I worked on. When I first hired in, they had a computer that had 16K of memory, if you can think of that. It was a plated wire computer. And we upgraded it in 91 to what we call the Block 2 configuration of computers. And aerospace, sons and aerospace engineer, that's awesome. We need more aerospace engineers. But when we upgraded the computers in 91 to a Block 2, they had 64K of memory, or 128 bytes. But that was basically the original Macintosh. It had a 68,000 microprocessor, which I knew because I studied that in college. So that was really exciting. The new headband looks great. I actually had, it's funny, if you were on Beth Ann's live earlier, I had this new headband on, which was really cute. But I was sitting on the couch getting ready for this live, and this headband actually fell off the wall and almost hit me on the head. And I'm like, okay, this headband wants to be worn. I'm going to wear this one because if it's going to jump off the wall, then I'm going to wear it. I think it's great that people are in science and engineering. If anything, NASA encourages people for science and engineering and technology. Sorry, thank you, Tam. My modesty police. Oh, you're going to see Endeavour when it opens. That was awesome. They're stacking it in a launch configuration. And to me, that's just so impressive when to see the space shuttle with the 2 solid rocket motors and the external tank and then the space shuttle mounted on top of that. All together, it's pretty impressive. One of my favorite memories was being at the launch pad at night with the xenon lights on, so it was all lit up. And they had the scaffolding removed because they were putting a payload in the payload bay. And it's just an amazing, to be there at night to see the lights and the rocket sitting at the launch pad was amazing. And it started to rain, so we climbed up under the engine nozzles to get out of the rain and was like, how cool is this job? We are out here under the space shuttle main engines at the launch pad of a giant rocket, hiding from the rain under an engine nozzle. And it was just, I've been so blessed by so many things that we've done. So I bring Bobbi the headband to Southampton. That would be awesome, thank you. But a bit too young to be retired. I retired at 57. I took an early out. They offered an early out. At the time, I had some back issues, and I wasn't able to stand for long periods of time, and I was in a scooter. And so they offered an early out, and I was under a lot of stress at the time because we were under schedule pressure to get to the launch, and maybe taking some what I thought were some risks that we didn't fully understand. And then I took the early out and I retired, and I've enjoyed retirement life ever since. I have not been to the Starbase in Texas. I follow that. I still watch all the launches on YouTube. The ones I can't see from our house because we live in Central Florida, so you can see the launches right from our front yard. But I watch them on YouTube, especially the Starship ones. I find that fascinating that they're doing a lot of good work. So, so after the space shuttle program and working SLS and Orion, I got to work on the interface for the computers between the ground launch control system and less stress. Yes, less stress is always good. Hello, everyone. Do I ever regret the early out? No, I don't regret the early out. I do miss a lot of the people that I used to work with. We'll see how things going. Are you in gender transition? Yes, I am transitioned to female formally last year and on hormone replacement therapy. Thank you for the headbands. Hello from Glasgow. Hello, everyone. What's project did you working on the most? So I enjoyed the space shuttle program because it was my young engineer days. It's kind of funny when you start out, you're learning, and I was so excited to learn everything. And the space shuttle main engines were a small system, but you could get your arms around it. It had computers, and I was a computer engineer. It had sensors, it had pneumatics, it had hydraulics, and it was a complete self-contained system that you could learn. And I kept learning and learning and learning. But then you got to a part, and I loved testing and checkout. We'd launch from the firing room. We'd power up the computers. We'd run it through its paces. We'd get it ready for launch. But after a certain point, you move from being the doer and the guy with your hands on the keyboard and doing to the guy that's training the next generation of people coming in to do. And that was fun too and very rewarding. But, it's like, I want to be the guy with the hands on. I want to be the person with the hands on the computer and doing all this stuff. I sometimes say guy because I was a guy then. I was Bob. So if I say a guy, then that's why, because I'm envisioning in my head my manifestation when I was working out there. And you want to be the person doing the work, and you're having to step back and teach others and watch them do it. And that's a different skill set you need to learn, especially as you move into management where you're not doing hands-on, you're giving guidance, and you're still responsible, but you're not the one doing it. And so you have to rely on others. When did I decide to transition? That's a whole story. I'll do that. Short answer is several times through my career I almost transitioned, but never thought I had the support to do it until recently when I've with the my home life and Tam and others around me, I felt I had the support to transition and was able to finally do that. Yes, lots of questions. Were you working for NASA when Challenger exploded? Yes, actually I was. That was my first launch from the firing room. So I had what they call the training seat. I remember that day vividly. It was 28 degrees Fahrenheit in the morning. It got down to that. I had my winter parka on in Florida. We came across the room. I was on the launch team, so I wasn't on the tanking team then. So we loaded the propellants in the middle of the night. But when I got there about 4 or 5 in the morning, they had left the water system on so that it didn't freeze and on just like a trickle, and so there were icicles all over the pad on the communication boxes and everything. There were these big icicles, and it was very surreal. And we're like, there's no way we're launching today. It's just way too cold. But our system was fine. There was no issue with the engines, and we got down to the final counts, and they gave a go for launch. And we had scrubbed a couple times the days before. That I had my roommate at the time that worked mechanisms, and the day before we launched Challenger, they scrubbed the launch because actually they had a mechanical problem with the crew door, the hatch. They couldn't get the ground support equipment off the bolted strip or something like that, and so they went to get a electric screwdriver to try and or a drill to drill out the bolt. And we were delayed. They all ran back to logistics to get this electric screwdriver or drill. They got back to the pad, and it was battery operated, and the batteries were dead. And you're like, really? And so we ended up scrubbing that day and resetting the launch for the next day, and that's when the cold front came in. And I remember we launched, and it was my first launch, so I didn't know what to expect. But I remember the engines starting 6.6 seconds before launch. And we were so focused on the engines and making sure all the data looked good. And then we heard liftoff, and we looked up, and the solid rocket motors ignited. And we were watching it go launch, and we were watching the data on our computer monitors, and we heard the call out, about throttling down, and then we heard. Then we watched the engines throttle back up, and we saw the engines throttle back up to 104%. And then we heard the call go at throttle up, and we were talking, I was asking a question, well, they've already throttled up, and they said, well, that's just the call that says they've throttled up and everything's good. And then caught of the corner of my eye on the TV monitor, I saw the cloud, the explosion happen, and we looked back over at the data, and it was just everything was frozen. There were 3 down arrows for data validity, down red arrows. And we kept looking at the TV screen, expecting to see an orbiter fly out of the cloud. And then they zoomed back, after a few minutes of just shock. They pulled back, and you could see, bits and pieces falling into the ocean, and you knew that we'd lost the crew. And I remember everybody who was sitting around me for years. That moment was vivid in my memory. It took me a long time to get over that. When we lost Columbia, I had left the shuttle program by then. But it's also another hard thing when you lose crew and they have problems like that. I was actually in Albuquerque, New Mexico for a training class, and I didn't get up to see it even though it flew over Albuquerque, because I'm like, we've seen a lot of landings. And my wife at the time called me up and said, we lost Columbia, and I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean we've lost it? So it's just hard. Those are the bad days, and I applaud SpaceX for everything they're doing, and I think they're doing an incredible good job. But they haven't had a bad day yet, and I hope they don't. I really do. That's what makes spaceflight hard, when you have those bad days. But you have to learn from them, and you have to pick up the pieces, and you have to go on. Because we're about exploring, and that's what we do. How about the moon landing today? I'm super excited for that. It's the first commercial company to land on the moon, and we are moving into that era, where it's not just governments. It's commercial entities moving and landing to the moon. I think they're landing near the South Pole, if I remember reading that correctly. So, it was. You've seen a lot of stuff. I used to think I was bad luck because my first launch was Challenger. When I first got to the Space Center, they had a launch scheduled the very next week, and it was another Challenger mission. I think it was 51F, and it had a pad abort. So they got down to T-minus 6 seconds, the engines lit, and then they shut down. And I'm like, oh, wow. So now I'm working in this new engine program. We just had a pad abort. And so it's, learning by fire, all these things going on. And then when they did launch at the end of the month, this was July 85. We launched at the end of July. We actually had one of the engines shut down on the way to orbit. So it was the first and only abort, what they call abort to orbit, where we had temperature sensors on the high pressure fuel pumps of the engine. And the ones we had were a little erratic. And so they would fail off scale high and be disqualified. And it was a running kind of joke amongst the engineers. It's not like if the sensor is going to fail, but when. But they'd all failed off scale high pretty quickly. And on that launch, we had one of the sensors on the engine 1, fail off scale high. And then a few minutes later, we had the second sensor fail off scale high, but it did it in a way that it took its time and it lingered above the red line. So it wasn't failed yet, but it was above what they call voting for shutdown. And it was long enough to get 3 strikes. So every 20 milliseconds is a strike. So 20, 40, 60 milliseconds, the computer said, hey, the only qualified sensor is voting for shutdown. I'm going to shut the engine down. So it shut the engine down. And fortunately, they were far enough in the mission where they were able to make orbit. And then we're going to a space station. It was a science lab, so they had the science. They just needed to be in low Earth orbit, and they were able to complete the mission with losing that one engine at like 4 minutes 55 seconds. I did get many years later. A friend of mine at Johnson Space Center in Mission Control got us into the Space Shuttle motion simulator, which the crew uses to train, and you can do launches and landings for that. And we did a launch, and I asked them if they could power off engine 1 at 4 minutes and 55 seconds, because I wanted to know what you'd see first. If you'd see the alarms or what you'd feel. First thing you feel is loss of thrust. You really do. And the way they simulate that is they tilt. It's a 6-degree freedom, kind of like a theme park ride, where you're in the orientation and everything's shaking. But when the engine shut down, you actually feel you move forward. And you could feel the thrust, and then you hear the alarms and everything like that. And so I was kind of interested. I always wanted to know what the crew felt during the abort to orbit. So that was kind of a fun thing that I got to do during my career. So, well, thank you all. I probably missed a lot of questions, and so if I've missed them and you want to ask again, sometimes when I'm talking, I'm not reading. I don't do 2 things well at the same time. So, did I know Chris Hadfield? Yes, I met him. We used to have to give briefings to the crew 2 weeks before launch. We'd have what they call a dry. They called it a countdown demonstration test, and the crew got into the space shuttle like they were going to do on a launch day, except we didn't have propellants loaded, but we were in a launch configuration. 2 weeks before, the day before that, the crew would come and we'd have to brief our systems to them for what everything that happened in the flow. So, hello, wow, from Australia. Got people all over the place. Thoughts on UAPs? I don't know. Could you remind me what UAP is? Kennedy Space Center is a must-see. Yes, you must. I think they did a really good job with the Space Shuttle Atlantis. Of course, I go there. It's like seeing an old friend. I really get emotional every time I go back. Mark Watney was actually on Mars. Then part of his rescue would be working on. What part would he be working on? I don't know. I would be. I really liked The Martian. That was a good movie. That was a good book. You were Chris's sister. There's actually we were in Chile, I think it was, and our tour guide was it Chile? Where did we go? No, it was Costa Rica. We went to the waterfall. We went in Costa Rica, and our tour guide was very proud of an astronaut that was from Costa Rica. It's Franklin Chang Diaz, and I'm like, I know him. He's actually working on a rocket engine called the Vasmir rocket engine, which is a plasma rocket engine. He's a very smart gentleman. He's flown many times into space on the space shuttle, and that was really exciting. He was like, yeah, I've briefed him before.
to pause.
I don't know. Am I still on my back on? I was screen recording to try and capture contents, and it's like my phone glitched. Am I still glitching? Because I wanted to try and catch comments, and it glitched. So it's like, stop screen recording. So, do you need to know coding when working capacity at NASA? I didn't need to, but it helped a lot. We had ground at the time. We used ground software, which was called. It was a language that NASA developed called GOAL, Ground Operational Aerospace Language, which used human syntax, readable syntax, so that theory engineers that didn't know computer science could read them for the space shuttle program. We've moved on. The current launch control system uses C and C++. So it helps to be able to have a computer science and be able to code and read code, but it's not necessary to do that. It helped me because I used to write a lot of utilities. This was the 90s, so I wrote them in Java to be able to create data analysis tools and products to be able to look at the data differently. Australia does have its own space agency now. My sister-in-law sent me some things, a mug and some stickers that say ARS, Australian Research Space Exploration. I don't think that's its real name, but the Australians seem to like it. Yeah, they're actually using C++ for the launch control system. Now we've control it, obviously. You don't let them use everything that C++ has to offer, because you can, do a lot of good things and a lot of bad things. So we try to make it very limited. If you know computer science, you know memory management is a big issue. Multi-threaded applications and threading is a big issue. So we try and limit what you can do and put some controls in place on how you write your software. But do I have thoughts about Space Force? I probably do. So I thought, hey, the Air Force did most of this all the time. I actually talked to somebody that was in Space Force, or actually worked for Aerospace Corporation that supported Space Force out here. And they made a good point. The only thing good I could say about Space Force is it gives them a source of money. Before they had to fight with the Air Force to get their piece of the pie. Now they have a direct feed to the budget. And so that's a good thing, I guess, from a Space Force perspective. But Air Force did all that stuff anyway beforehand. What's the most memorable experience in your career? It's Brittany, by the way. Hi, Brittany. It's Brittany, the other granddaughter. So it was always working on the space shuttle. I go back to the fun times I had troubleshooting problems and being on the launch team for missions. And I actually liked cryogenic loading, what we call tanking. It started about 9 hours before launch. I enjoyed tanking more than the launch, actually, because when you load liquid hydrogen at minus 423 degrees Fahrenheit and liquid oxygen at minus 280 degrees Fahrenheit into a system, it goes from Florida sunshine and 100-degree temperatures down to subcooled cryogenic temperatures. Things happen, weird things happen to the hardware, and it's fun to watch. And that's where, if you're going to have a failure, it's going to happen as you go from ambient temperatures to cryogenic temperatures, at least from a propulsion system guy. And what was STS-135 for me? I remember watched it with my my first wife, Sue, and we watched it from the launch control center parking lot. And it was overcast cloud day, and we launched, and we could see the rocket trail go up into the clouds, and then we didn't see it anymore. And it was, the saddest part was we knew a lot of our friends that were contractors were all being laid off that day. And so because the shuttle program was winding down, all the NASA people got moved to new programs and new projects, but the contractors actually lost their jobs and were laid off. A lot of them were able to come back later on when SLS and Orion came back up, but they had to do some things for a few years. It's very hard, to be in that market when you have problems like that. It's the contractors that end up being hurt. Is it true that once the solid rocket booster is lit, they could not be turned off? Yes, that is true. You can't turn them off, and so they do have what they call flight termination system on there. So the Air Force, or now Space Force, requires you to be able to what they call command and control, which means to be able to destroy something is to be able to control it. So there's linear shaped charges along the side of the solid rocket motors, And so you can't turn them off, but you can blow them up, which basically removes the thrust from the rocket. So it's a linear shaped charge that goes down the side of the solid rocket motor, and it just basically turns off the thrust by opening up a side of the motor. Did I work with J.C. Melicor, engineer of the state? Is that, I know of Tony Melicor. I worked with a Tony Melicor. Is that the same? If I could consult for any space company, which would interest you the most? I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if you're prodding because you work for Relativity. But, I don't know. I haven't really thought of that. I guess one that's looking to go out beyond Earth orbit. I still think we are a civilization that wants to explore the heavens and go on to Mars, even though, people say, what's the practicality of that? Well, it's part of human nature to explore, even though there are places I know, the oceans that need to be explored too, and I'm all for that too. But, space tends to inspire kids in the next generation and gives them the imagination, and it makes them interested in learning math and science and other things that they'll need. And it's the catalyst that really spurs learning within the next generation, and that's what I think is important. What do I think about the James Webb? I love all the pictures from the James Webb. I am super excited what we're going to learn, and I'm just excited for all the things that we've seen the James Webb. And I think, I remember they launched that from French Guiana on an Ariane 5. I actually got to go down to French Guiana back in 2008 and talk with the Europeans about, we were going between shuttle and the next program, and we wanted to reach out and talk to them and see how they did launch processing to make sure that, we're not tunnel vision in our own thoughts of this is the only way to do things. And so we went down for a week and talked to them and got to see an Ariane 5 launch. And it's incredible what they do there. They actually have an impressive outfit down in French Guiana. Their launch team comes over from Europe for the campaign. And that's why we wanted to go down when they weren't launching. We're like, we don't want to bother you during a launch campaign. We're like, no, you don't understand. The people you need to talk to are only there during a launch campaign. Otherwise, they're back in Europe and France and things like that. So, do I think there's life out there? Yes, I do. I think the universe is an incredibly big place, and it would be insane to think we're the only life in the universe. Do I think we've been visited? Probably not. I mean, space is a big place. What are your plans in Brisbane, Australia? So our friend Christian Hull, I say friend, we just met him, but we've been communicating, is getting on in Brisbane, and he's supposedly going to do a sausage sizzle for us. He's got a friend that's got a ute with a barbecue grill, and he's going to meet us at the port before he gets on, and we're going to have a sausage sizzle. So that's exciting. So we're excited for other things, like in Sydney. A lot of Tam's family are going to come over and meet us, and we're going to have a day in Sydney. And so her best friend is going to meet us in Newcastle, and then actually her sister and daughter are getting on in Brisbane as well, and doing Brisbane to Hong Kong. So sausage sizzle, yeah. I'm sure you have NASA secrets you can't divulge. I don't know that they're secrets. People used to joke about, do you have aliens and things like that. And it's like, no, we would joke, we could tell you, but then we'd have to kill you.
Like you didn't land on the moon.
Well, I know Australians believe we don't land on the moon, but we did land on the moon. You can actually see it. It's visible from some of the orbiting satellites. You can see the remainder of the Apollo craft. You can see the tracks that the lunar rover took. We're in Sydney. We're in Sydney on March 8th, I think. And we're there all day from the morning till like midnight. And so we're going to meet up with family and just enjoy family.
All day.
All day. Damn, Bobby and the moon. Yeah, a lot of Australians don't believe in the moon, that we land in the moon. I think space exploration is so cool. I do too, actually. I think it's important, and I think it really inspires kids and younger generation and older generation. I think, of course, I'm a nerd. I get excited every time I see a rocket engine light, but that was me. What brought you to go to Florida College? So I always wanted to work at NASA. I went to a 2-year school up in Connecticut to get an associate's degree first, and it was 1982, and in April, we had 6 inches of snow on the ground in Connecticut, and I was going to go to the University of Connecticut, But I had some friends that went to FIT in Melbourne right from high school, and I called down to FIT that April. We had 6 inches of snow, and they said it's sunny and 86 degrees. And I said, that's where I'm going. And so I went to Florida to go to school and pretty much never came back. I went right from college to working at the Space Center. Just don't trust the U.S. government. Well, I mean, there's some fair, I get that. How do I feel about Elon Musk? As a person, I'm not overly a fan. I'm excited by some of the companies that he's been involved with. I mean, SpaceX, I think, is doing some incredible things, even though I'm not really excited about the person Elon Musk. I do think SpaceX plays an important role in commercial space. And you look at they landing their boosters. They land their boosters routinely now, and that's something people were wondering, can you do this? Does this make sense? They do it now every day. I mean, a couple times a week it seems like they're launching and landing their boosters. Yeah, it does put into perspective how big the universe is. So, thoughts on Artemis and its launch, NASA's most powerful rocket. So I've worked on Artemis a lot of my career, and so I was thrilled on how well it did around the moon. And I know I think I've seen there's some changes in the schedule. The next one is supposed to send crew around the moon, not landing yet. I don't remember when the landing date is. Area 51. I've actually never been to Area 51. But Artemis is a really good asset. We can loft a lot of payload to lunar orbit. Obviously, Starship can too. Once Starship is up and running, and Orion did incredibly well on that first mission around the moon, and of course, it's the one that's going to carry humans in a cargo. 4 humans to the moon, cislunar space, where they're planning to build a little outpost called the Gateway, circling the moon around the one of the Lagrange points, and then we can go from the Gateway to the lunar surface and then back to Gateway. And so it'll be not a permanently manned lunar orbiting space station, but it'll be a kind of a way station where you can go and plan for going down to the lunar surface and back up. And so you don't have to bring everything all the way every time. Launch was incredible. Actually, we were in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We didn't get to see it, but my granddaughter, Brianna, was actually at the Launch Control Center filming it with her phone and sent us the video, and I really appreciated that. It was so incredibly impressive. And I was sad we didn't get to see it. It was just too many clouds on the horizon. We were literally in the middle of the Atlantic. Do I have the greatest jewelry? Well, thank you. It's a collection of mishmash things, though the turtle ones I wore the other day were new purchases from Kona. And of course, we went to a spa day. I went to a spa day in Hilo. So I got new nails and got some turtle necklaces. What do you think the most valuable thing out of space exploration? So to me, I think the most valuable thing, you hear about spin-offs and everything and technology. Yeah, I mean, it's a positive thing. The things that drive technology are space exploration and war, and that really drives technology. And I would rather focus on the positives of space exploration for technology development as opposed to the reality of a lot of the technology development comes from war and the negative side of it. But space technology development is a more positive aspect because we're trying to help humans expand their mind and knowledge of the universe. Plus, like I said, it inspires the next generation of engineers and scientists and explorers that want to go off and explore space, and it gives them the incentive to go study math and science and all the other things they need to do that. So, go parent, do what you need to do. How big is the universe? I don't know that we know the answer to that question. I think there's a known answer that's to the visible universe that we've been able to see with Hubble and James Webb and other ones. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's, as Carl Sagan said, it is big, billions and billions of stars. Did anyone on the ship? I don't know about the cellular provider blackout. We haven't experienced anything. Met another guy after the launch who worked on it also. A lot of people worked on Artemis across the country. Of course, you had SLS out of Marshall Space Flight Center. Orion was out of Johnson Space Center, but Lockheed was the one that built Orion in Denver. So I spent a lot of time up in Denver, in their avionics lab up in the out just outside of Denver. And that was really fun. Sneaky Bluetooth earbud. Is that about Tam listening in? I don't know. Hull of U.S. was without service via. Oh, interesting. No, we with the shuttles. Did you go inside? I've been inside every space shuttle, even the ones that aren't around anymore, more Challenger. And I've been as an engine person. There's an aft engine compartment with scaffolding that gets put in and around the propulsion system to get you access to the avionics bays in there, to get access to the fluid lines and the engines themselves. And it's actually interesting. We had pre-launched the space shuttle orbiters in the orbiter processing facility. It's what we called horizontal, so it's like this. And so you had all the platforms to get in amongst the engines. Well, when you get out to the pad, the shuttle is vertical, and so you have a different set of platforms you have to get in when the shuttle is vertical versus horizontal. And so you had to learn how to maneuver in and amongst all those engines. I've been in the payload bay and the mid-body. I've been in the flight deck and the mid-bay area there. One of the most, we had an issue with the engine percentage. There's some meters on the cockpit that tell you the engine chamber pressure. And originally, before they went to like a glass cockpit, they were tape meters, and so they would come on and they'd had the readings along the edge, and they had a tape meter that kind of went up and down to show what they were. Well, one of the engine tape meters wasn't responding, and we had to troubleshoot it, and we found there was a fuse actually in line with the meter, and the fuse had blown. And to get to the fuse, you had to actually go down to the mid bay, not the flight deck, but the mid bay, and you had to drop the overhead ceiling compartment. And then there was a whole bunch of wire bundles. You had to kind of get your arm up around, and then there was a fuse block behind that, and then there was about 10 fuses in there, and you had to get the fuse out, and you had to put the new fuse in, but then you had to safety wire all the fuses together. And I felt so bad writing that instruction to go do that, because I don't know how the technician was able to do that. Those guys are really good, and they're able to get in. They're very dexterous to get your hands in there, but I could barely even see the fuse block. But to write the instructions to not only put it in, but then to say you have to wire wrap all the fuses together, I felt really bad having to do it, but that was what the print required. And so moon landing navigation problem, second attempt at 8:30. Okay, thank you for the update. Would you go to the moon if you could afford to? So I don't know how well I do in space travel. I'm okay on cruise ships. The bouncing up and down doesn't bother me. But space travel in 0G, you're always falling, it seems like. And I don't know how my inner ear would do. I probably would be sick the entire time in space. So I don't know if I would actually go to space myself. I know others enjoy it, and they've found it. You get used to it after a while, just like cruising. So I probably would. I think the seeing the moon and seeing the Earth from the moon would be a life-altering experience. To just be able to look back from the moon and see the Earth as a whole. Obviously we've seen it in pictures and photos and things like that, but to see it in person, to actually stand on the lunar surface and looking back at your home planet is just something you can't do without being changed. Do I think we're living in a simulation? Sometimes it feels like there's a glitch in the matrix, doesn't it? I don't think there's actually it's not a simulation, probably. Let's see. So some of the other things I did between Space Shuttle and SLS, I was working on what they call a strategic development manager for a while for our development organization. And I was the fluid development manager and then the command and control development manager for a while. For a while, we worked on how to get back to the moon as a way journey to Mars. And so we worked on logistics planning. How do you do the logistics of going back to the moon and then on to Mars? And to me, it was the coolest title I ever had, even though titles don't really mean anything. But I was the supportability manager for non-terrestrial systems, which I always thought was a cool title to have. But basically it meant you're trying to figure out how you're going to do logistics supply to the moon. And we actually talked to the Army Corps of Engineers up in, I think they're Vermont, it might have been New Hampshire. We took the NASA plane up there and visited with them for a day or so and talked to them because they're the ones that do the logistic planning for McMurdo Base in Antarctica. And going to the moon is a lot like going to Antarctica, because you have to bring everything with you. Nothing grows there, nothing lives there, so you have to plan all that ahead of time. Do NASA and where? So Area 51, that's an Air Force thing. It's a research lab, I think. I don't really know what it is. Is Tam already tired of talking about space? Yes, Tam is already tired of me talking about space. But that's why I'm here. I mean, she's like, I've heard all these stories. Hopefully you're feeling better in your simulation. Drink plenty of water. Yeah, water is important, to stay hydrated. But some of the other things we worked on a thing called orbital spaceplane, which was before Constellation took off. It was going to be basically a capsule, or a kind of, you've seen Sierra Nevada's got a Dream Chaser, something like that. That was one of the proposals. It was going to ride on an expendable rocket and send humans to the International Space Station. That was something for a while that we were working on, and then after Columbia happened and we lost it on reentry, they pretty much blackballed Sierra Nevada, which is kind of sad because they didn't want a winged craft after Columbia. And we talked about, somebody asked me about pendulums and safety, and after an accident, the pendulum tends to swing back very, very conservative, risk averse, and then over time you become more accepting of risks and things like that. Oh, I love that headband. That's so cool. I didn't know people could do that. I like it better than the cowboy hat, actually, but the headband was really cool. So things change over time, and so I think Sierra Nevada got a kind of a bad rep because they had a winged craft, and the ones that were moving forward were more capsules that could do a ballistic entry. I think about that time Soyuz had a failure, and what saved them was they had just a uncontrolled ballistic entry, which still worked, and they were able to land safely even though they were way off course. And so it geared NASA's thinking towards capsules over winged craft, and I think there's a place for both. So any other questions? Oh, thank you. So I've enjoyed working on all those things. Actually, I met, when we work in orbital spaceplane, it's kind of funny, because people's jobs change, and I always associate people with the first thing they did when I saw them. We had the shuttle project engineer or the SLS launch project engineer, gentleman by the name of Phil Weber, on the Artemis 1 mission. When I met him, he was worked external tank. He was ET mechanical guy, and so he's always been ET mechanical. I've always been an engine avionics person, because that was what I worked on when you first started your career. First time I met this person was working orbital spaceplane, and she was on the Boeing team. There was a Boeing Lockheed team, each were competing, and she was on the Boeing team at the time, and she was the flight software lead, and I was working flight software, avionics, and integrated vehicle health management. And it was a young lady by the name of Charlie Blackwell Thompson, and we met working on orbital spaceplane, and then a few years later she came over to NASA and started working in our NASA test director office, and worked with her throughout a lot of my career, and she became the launch director for Artemis 1, and she was the first NASA female launch director for that program. And so but it's funny how you meet people under one guise, and then over the years, your job description changes and their job description changes, and so you always have to be nice to people, because you may be somebody's boss today, and tomorrow they might be your boss, and so it doesn't make sense to be mean or nasty to people. You should always be positive and encouraging and helpful for people. If they need help, give them answers. Do I think people will live on the moon, Mars? Temporary. I think they will live for short periods of time. Certainly, I think we'll get back to the moon. I think we have to learn a lot to get to Mars. Mars is a very difficult problem. It's so far away where light needs like 11 minutes or so to get between Earth and Mars, and so you are on your own for a lot of it. You can't have mission control looking over your everything you do and improving everything. You've got to have a lot more autonomy. Most important question, is Tam on the couch with a pillow covering her ears? No, she's on the bed and she's listening into the live, and she's supporting. She's very good. What do we do in our spare time apart from cruising? We plan cruising. We think about cruising, and Tam plants. She's a gardener. So plan for cruising and gardening. Maddie, Diana Philip Maddie is an amazing photographer and a gorgeous soul. How did you and Tam meet? Was it on a cruise? It actually was on a cruise. We met on Voyager of the Seas coming into Fiji. We both got up early to get sunrise pictures. And then
The photos behind you, Bobbi.
Oh, the photo behind me. Oh, these ones. These are from Matty, yeah. He is on this cruise. Sorry, I can't always get from the context. But Tam's like, yeah, the photos behind us, that's from Matty. He takes incredibly good pictures, and he's brought a printer with him to print the photos out, and then he sticks them on his door for people to take. He's like, if you want any, just come by my door and get them. And so he puts them out on his door for people to take, and we've got a few of them up on the wall behind us. So sorry I didn't read the question. Is Tam Australian? Yes. From Victoria. Well, thank you. Does Tam eat her boiled eggs just because she loves them? I think it's a good way to get protein. That's why kind of she started doing the eggs. Yeah, we were on Beth Ann Live earlier today, and yesterday actually, too, talking about diversity and inclusion in the cruise. Thank you for the I got like 14 new headbands or 15 new headbands. We bought a bunch on Temu, I think, and had them shipped to our friend Lindsay, who went back home for a few days between LA and Hawaii, and she brought them back on this. And we picked up one at Walmart, which is like a tiara. That'll show up on a special occasion. It was a fun career. What other career would you have chosen? I probably would have done something dealing with computers. I always wanted to do something in space, and I'm very happy and proud that I was able to support this nation's space program for many years. I just love, I'm a space geek from heart, I will always be a space geek. A lot of comments coming over there. College degree was computer engineering from Florida Institute of Technology. Which Hollywood film about space NASA do you think is closer to real life? That's a good question. I think The Martian actually was pretty good. From
The Dish.
The Dish. If you haven't seen The Dish yet, I would suggest it. It's an Australian movie about Australia's contribution to the Apollo moon landing. It's well worth looking at. I can't remember what service it's on, but who's the most famous astronaut you met? Probably Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin. They came through the firing room shortly before Neil Armstrong passed away, and I gave him a tour of our new Launch Control Center, and it was in there. Dish is a classic. Have I read Hidden Figures? I've seen the movie. I can't speak to the accuracy personally, but I do believe it is accurate, fairly accurate. Yeah, you can't really. I mean, I always wanted to work in space and end up working on the space shuttle and the space shuttle main engines. I was growing up. I was a Star Trek nerd, and my favorite character was actually Scotty because he worked on the engines on the Space Shuttle Enterprise, or Space Shuttle Enterprise. Worked on the Enterprise, and I got to work on the engines of an actual spacecraft. And so, how cool is that? From going from wanting to be Scotty on Star Trek to actually being an engineer. And I got to talk to James Doohan many years later. He was at a autograph signing thing. I went down. I told him that he was an inspiration to me, and because of him, I now work at NASA and I work on the engines for a spacecraft. And I think that was really cool. Thank you. Is it difficult to get on at NASA? So it can be. They have what they call a Pathways internship program, and to me, I think that's the best way to get in at NASA. Keep an eye out when they offer interns if you're a college student. If you get in on the intern program, you've got your best shot at getting into NASA. Otherwise, it's very difficult. If you're a veteran, you get veterans preferences getting in because NASA's a civil service. It's a civil servant. It's a government agency. So veterans get preference, interns get preference on those kind of things. Another good way is working as a support contractor and proving your worth. And a lot of times they'll bring you over and that's how I got in there. I actually didn't have the grades NASA was looking for when I graduated from college. They had to be over 3.0, and I was a little under 3.0. Or 3.4 or 3. I forget what their grade point average requirement was, but I wasn't there. So I went to work for Lockheed Space Operations Company for 5.5 years, and then NASA's like, "Hey, we want you on our team over here," and they brought me over. So that's the best way is to get a job as a support contractor and work hard and tell people that you want to eventually come over to NASA and work as a civil servant. And it's good because you get any fun astronaut stories. There was an astronaut named Story Musgrave who's been on a lot of space shuttle programs. Super smart guy. He was famous, for, I guess, for the Hubble repair missions. But he'd always show up at the briefings with a book. And so he'd come in the briefing and he'd be reading a book as he walked in the room, and then he'd put the book down, listen to our briefing, and then he'd pick the book up and walk out with it, reading a book. I always thought that was interesting. Have you ever met Neil deGrasse Tyson? I have not. Yeah, GPA doesn't always, plus I may have moved away from home, partied a little much in a couple of semesters, so I'm not into condoning it, but hey, it worked for me. What would it be like casually walking around NASA? It's like any other place. There's a bunch of people there that are doing good stuff, except you get to see cool hardware. The good days are when you can go out and see the hardware. When you're in a meeting with a PowerPoint presentation talking about the budget or schedule or what the plans are, it's kind of tedious. It's like any other job. But you walk out on the floor, you walk into the VAB, and you see all this space hardware being stacked, or you go out to the mobile launch platform or the pad. That's when it's like, wow, this is really a cool job. This is not just any job. This is a cool job. And so it's the hardware that we like. I don't know Rick Sturcow. No, he grew up in San Diego. I don't know him. There's a lot of people, people are always like, "Hey, do you know this person at NASA?" Like, well, there's at the time 14,000 people at the Kennedy Space Center, and during the shuttle program. No, I probably don't. We were actually on a river cruise in Europe, and somebody's like, "Hey, I know a guy who works at NASA. Do you know him?" And I'm like, "Oh, probably not, but who is it?" And he's like, "Oh, this guy," and his name was Larry Morgan. I'm like, "Yeah, actually, I know him. He's my boss." So sometimes you do know the people, but a lot of times you're like, "No, sorry, I don't." I worked at Ohio at Glenn Research Center. Glenn, I only went to Glenn once, and it was for a training class. But the people that worked there were super nice. We went to see an Indians baseball game, and they told us where to go to get the best scalped tickets, and where the cheap parking is and things like that. So they were really friendly when we went there. Royal should hire you as a guest speaker. That would be fun. Program manager actually hinted at that a little bit, so we'll see what happens after the World Cruise. That might be fun. I'd like to figure out how to blend my career at NASA with my transition story too, and I'm kind of thinking of how to do that. I'd like to maybe try and write a memoir or something, but we'll see how that happens. I live in Naples and have never been over. Do you give tours? I actually, a lot of people come over and visit, and I love going out to the Space Center when people are there and kind of showing them. I don't have inside access anymore, but if you go get a visitor pass to go in to the visitor center, I like to show people Atlantis specifically and kind of talk through the space shuttle and where all the things are and about the history and stuff. Have you guys been to Ireland? So Tam hasn't, but I have. I've been there back in '98. We drove around from Dublin south to Waterford to Cove, Cork, Ring of Kerry, up through Cliffs of Moher, and then back over to Dublin. It was beautiful. What ports do you stop in when in Australia? So we stop in Sydney, Newcastle, Brisbane, Airlie Beach, and Cairns are the ones. Atria should publish it. Yeah, I may know somebody who's worked for them or kind of influenced for them, so might have an in there. You're welcome. I enjoyed talking about NASA and my career. So we'll do this again sometime, and also we can open it up to other things, just general question and answers. A lot of people are asking about my transition timeline. A lot of people like the NASA stories, and I love talking about NASA. And I apologize, a lot of these questions come by really fast, so if you can message or ask questions in a video that we've got posted, I can try and answer them or set up for the next time where I can answer them. If it's a long answer, I'll say, well, I'll answer it because I'm not really good at typing. But if the question has a long answer, I'll address it next time we go live and talk about those things. But so thank you from Titusville. We know where that is. Limerick, Cliffs of Moher on Monday. That's awesome. When I went to the Cliffs of Moher, you couldn't see anything. It was all foggy. We went into the gift shop for 30 minutes, came back out, and it was beautiful. So things change quickly. Thank you all so much, and I'm going to kind of let you have the rest of your day. I was kind of put this for an hour and a half just because I didn't want to deal with the little puzzle piece that comes up when you're at the end of your allotted time if you want to extend it. So I put it at an hour and a half, but I was thinking I would only do an hour today, and then we'll schedule another one for another day. So thank you all for coming. How is it living in Florida? When we get back from the World Cruise, we may move out of Florida. It's nothing about the Space Center, but it's just not necessarily the best place, especially for trans people at the moment. So we'll see what happens. So bye. We'll talk to y'all later. Have a great day.